So Pastor John, it's March 2022 and we're here at Carrickalinga Camp for our leadership camp. We're going to talk about the history of this camp because it goes back a long way, back to the mid-70s. So where did it all start? Where did the idea of this camp come from?
Well, our fellowship was up at Elizabeth at the time. That's where where things got really going, and we had an assembly of about 200 people, and we used to go at Easter time down to the Lutheran youth camp at Clarendon.
Yep.
And we had such a great time with all the folks together. We, had most of our assembly would go to the camp.
Yes.
And so at the end, I walked into the men's toilets, and some of our good, helpful brothers were in there, most of them tradesmen. They were cleaning up, and they said, "Oh, we've been talking," as they do, and they said, "We want to get our own camp." I said, "Well, that's all very fine, but where are we going to get the money?" They said, "You organise the money and we'll do the work." Well, they've kept them at it. Still, all these years later, some of them are still alive and still working. So we started looking, and we had a list of wants. There was about 5 of them. We wanted to be somewhere near a nice beach.
Which we've got.
Yes. We wanted to have access to mains water and to mains power, and we wanted to have a few acres of flattish ground that we could do, and we wanted to have some shade. We got all of those except for the shade. When we found this place, we'd looked at many places across the Fleurieu Peninsula, and none of them were suitable. And one day I walked into an office, land agent's office in Victor Harbour, and there was a young salesman there. He said, "I know just the place you're looking for, because people used to come here with the permission of the landowner to do some bush camping along the edge of the creek." So that's what made him think of it.
Yep.
And so the place had come up for sale. This was all part of Fawktree Station. It had been subdivided, and there was 55 acres here that was up for sale.
Yep.
And so we saw this, and anyway, it all came together without going into too much about the finances and everything.
Where did you get the money from?
Well, we didn't have much in the assembly account, and we found this place which we fell in love with.
Yes.
And so we went across. We brought, remember one Sunday, half a dozen of us came down on a Sunday morning and had a look at it, and we loved it straight away. So we went across to Victor Harbour, and we made it. Well, the offer was, I think, 33,000, but they said that they'd come down to 30.
Yep.
And so, which sounds not much money, but it was a fair bit in those days.
Especially when you don't have that sitting in the bank.
That's right. So then we were signed up, and they said, "Oh, we want 10% deposit."
Yes.
I said, "Oh, would 5 be all right?" And we were a bit irregular, but we'll submit it to the vendor. When they did, and they were very keen to sell, and so they accepted the 5%, and then we had to raise the finance. Now, the bank wouldn't lend that because they didn't lend money on vacant land. It had to have a building on it. But there was a brother who'd sold a property, and he had some money, and he lent us the money, took out a mortgage over it, and we then took possession, and we said to the folks, let's put in, that each family could put in 3 years camp fees in advance, and we were taking into account what we'd save at Easter and at Christmas, where we used to go to Victor Harbour, Inland Valley Caravan Park. And so a lot of us decided we'd do that, and it was the princely sum of $100 per family for 3 years' fees. And so we put that in, and that was enough money to buy all of the materials for number 1 ablution block.
Yeah, right. Which we'll go and have a look at in a
We'll see
sec,
that
yeah.
later. And so we were able to build that with 99% of free labour.
Yeah, right.
And then we had a building, went back to the bank, and they'd lent us money. Then we were able to
Amazing.
pay the brother back.
Amazing.
So that
Now
was
this
that.
was we've just walked in from the main road,
Yes.
and so this was the original spot for the entrance point of the camp. Originally there was a ford here, or fjord, or depending on how you want to say it.
It was. We called it a ford.
Yeah, so there's a
And
creek running
went
through
across
here.
there. Went across here somewhere, and this was the entrance to this property, and it just dipped down, and then there was the track that went from there.
Yeah.
So that was our entrance.
And
to
that
it.
got washed away in a flood or something. That was
Some years later we had a big flood. We had 2 or 3 big floods,
Yeah.
and one of them just completely washed the ford away.
A church campsite at Carrickalinga, where more than 20 caravans were washed away by the floodwaters.
Caravan owners are still counting the cost of yesterday's downpour at Carrickalinga. The rain turned the Carrickalinga Creek into a torrent, flooding across the Adelaide Revival Centre campsite. More than 20 caravans were swept away, smashed like toys against trees and the riverbank. This van teetered precariously on the edge of a bridge as a backhoe was called in to salvage it. Council workers, State Emergency Service and CFS volunteers spent the day retrieving the wreckage.
One man and his wife came down here and they couldn't find the van at all. Eventually he found, it looks like the roof. He's not sure, but he thinks it's the roof of the van.
Debris carried by the swollen creek smashed into buildings. Insurance will not cover the damage, which is expected to run close to $200,000. With heavy rain continuing to fall, the campsite could again be inundated this evening. Van owners are already on standby to evacuate. SES crews are prepared for more damage tonight.
We've got a flood on our hands here at camp. It was amazing, I've never seen it come this wide. We're over the hill and we've got ourselves a major river flood here. We've got 3 caravans down here, we can't reach them. At the moment they're not moving, but we cannot get a vehicle in there. And the bridge over to the lockup is well and truly under, as you can see at the middle of the back of this picture.
So you've raised the money, you've settled on the property.
Yes.
What happened after that?
Well, we set to work. We went to the normal Christmas camp at Victor Harbour. We brought our caravans across here and camped along the side of the creek.
On this side of the creek?
The other side, we
yeah.
went across there, that was our property, and we set to work clearing away the bushes along the edge. We got where we'd come from at the front. David Patterson had dug a trench in because the mains water from there, and we had water across the creek to give us the luxury of a nice cold shower, and we also built another little building which was called a long drop. And
so for those that don't know, that's a toilet without plumbing. It's
Yes,
just a
that's
big
right,
hole in the
yes.
ground. Yeah.
And so a number of us came across from Victor Harbour. We stayed here and we started clearing away the stuff and got ready. We'd put a plan into council for building the ablution block, and so within a few weeks we were, getting the foundations down and pouring the
Well, let's let's head on and have a look at that. So how many people were in the fellowship at that time? And
we had about 200
Yeah.
adults, I think.
Okay.
And I remember saying to the council they wanted to know how big we liked it to get, and I said, oh well, we've got a couple hundred and we might get up to 500 or 600 one day.
Yes.
Hopefully they've forgotten about that because we've got a lot more than that now. So we realised that legally we were able to come across here, and so we built it, and this is 2 flat top rail trucks that we managed to buy,
Right.
and and we
As
got
in like railway
yeah,
cars.
the railway, you know, like you see them still to this day,
Yeah.
when they got a flat top rather than the container ones,
Yeah.
They took the wheels off and
Yes.
so on, and that's pretty strong
right?
stuff.
Wow.
So we were able to do that, put a concrete lid over
Yeah.
it. Well,
So I heard you had some problems with the locals when you first
Yes.
started building.
before we were able to take possession of the land, we had to get the approval of the local council, and so we put in our submission, and I can well remember the day that we were granted permission. It was the Friday before the long weekend in October, and they had their council meeting, and the secretary of the council, or he was really the manager, he ran the council pretty much, and he said, look, ring me up Saturday morning at home and I'll tell you how you got on. And I rang him up. We were staying down at Moana in the caravan park having an outreach, and we rang up and he said, well, the council have agreed to you coming in.
Great.
And again, you know, we had to get a planning mover in. So that's when we all came down here, and where you know, a lot of the assembly saw it for the first time.
Yeah.
And it happened that the people who had given the idea to the salesman were down here, and we turned up like ants at a picnic.
And they were camped down
They
here,
were
were
camped
they?
down
Right.
here, and their folks were kicking the football around and all this sort of thing. What are you doing here? It wasn't their property anyway,
Yeah.
you know, we were
So
just
it was free
camping
camping.
here.
Yeah.
So anyway, we that was in October, and by Christmas time we had the plan in for number 1 ablution block, and that was approved.
Yeah.
And so immediately after the Christmas camp at Victor Harbour, we brought our caravans across here and we prepared for that. And by the end of the month, we already had the foundations
Right.
down for
Yeah, okay.
that ablution
Yeah.
block.
Because of course you can't have a camp with lots of people without having, well, you
Well,
could, but it'd be a lot harder.
We could, but I think we'd have a lot less people wanting to come.
So this is the building here,
That's it.
which is what we call number 1 ablution block, which is
Yes.
really a showers, toilets, laundry
Yes.
today.
That's right.
And so was this 1975 when you started construction on this? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it would have been all during 1975.
Yeah.
We were working on this,
Yeah.
and we were by October 1975. We had this building up, and it's now divided up a bit more. But we had a ladies' side and the men's side, and a big laundry on this end
Yes.
that we're looking at now. And so we had our first communion service here,
So this is in this
Yeah, that's
area
right.
in
Yep.
the end here.
and we had our first communion service here on the long weekend, back in the days when that weekend became our working bee weekend.
So this is the October long weekend,
October
1975.
1975.
Yeah, okay.
So we had this
This is,
building in here.
so this was a laundry.
Yeah, that's right. And that side of it as well.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So that's now a storeroom.
It's not a massive space. You must have
No,
crammed
well,
people in here.
It's twice of this.
Yeah.
And there was no ceiling, and we had the young people down here, and they were literally sitting in the rafters when we had our communion service. I remember standing in that corner and giving a talk, and there were young people looking down on me.
From the rafters,
Yeah,
from the
from
open
the
ceiling.
rafters, yes. And they enjoyed
funny.
themselves. So, yeah.
Wow. So 1975, you had your first fully fledged camp down here with the
Right.
toilet facilities built, and so of course there was no hall.
No,
So it
there
was a tent
no hall.
originally,
No.
big sort of marquee type
we
tent.
had caravans out here and down there, and at the end of the run down there, which is near the bottom of the hill there now,
Yeah.
halfway between here and the current hall,
Yes.
we hired a big marquee where we had our meetings.
Yes. Yeah.
And
And so you hired that each time,
that's
each
right.
camp, and
Yeah.
they came.
Well, for Christmas we would have it down there, but Easter time the laundry became our makeshift kitchen.
Yeah.
And we had power outlets here, and the marquee would go over the top of that,
Yeah.
and so that we could hire urns and
Yes.
toasters and that sort of thing from
Yes.
within there. So that all worked together for us to.
And so, what was the next sort of major thing that you did after completing this toilet block?
Well, the same year we built the shed over here,
Yes.
which we used for storage, but that later became like a boys' dorm and so on. So that sort of got us by for a few years, but the assembly was growing so fast
Yes.
that we. So I think that the next major thing that we did was to build the hall.
All right. I'm not going to have a look at the hall because it's a pretty amazing building. It's really the
Yes.
hub and the central part of
Yes.
what camp is today.
Yeah.